Maya learned to fight before she could properly tie her shoes. At 6 years old, she already knew that grown-ups made promises they couldn't keep. Her mother had whispered, "I'll come back for you," before walking out of the children's home, leaving behind only the scent of cheap perfume and a heart-shaped locket that Maya would clutch during sleepless nights. The children's home was crowded, underfunded, and overwhelmed. Mrs. Peterson, the tired director, did her best with limited resources. But there were simply too many children and too few hands to care for them all. Maya quickly learned that crying brought no comfort, complaining brought no solutions, and waiting for rescue brought only disappointment. By age 10, Maya had developed an invisible armor around her heart. She watched other children get excited about potential families coming to visit, only to see their faces crumble when they weren't chosen. She decided early on that hoping hurt too much. Instead, she focused on what she could control: her grades, her behavior, and her determination to never need anyone. The other children came and went. Some found families, others aged out into uncertain futures. Maya remained, growing stronger and more self-reliant with each passing year. She became the unofficial protector of younger children, standing up to bullies and mediating fights. Even as a teenager, she possessed a fierce sense of justice that both impressed and worried the staff. When Maya turned 18, she faced the reality that thousands of young people experience every year. The children's home could no longer house her. The small monthly support would barely cover basic necessities, and she had no family to fall back on. Most young adults in her situation struggled to survive their first year of independence. Maya was determined to do more than just survive. She found a tiny studio apartment in the roughest part of town, where the rent was affordable and the neighbors minded their own business. The walls were thin, the heating barely worked, and sirens wailed through the night, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, Maya had a space that belonged to her alone. Working 3 jobs became Maya's normal routine. She cleaned office buildings before dawn, attended community college classes during the day, and stocked shelves at a grocery store until midnight. Her body ached constantly, and she survived on instant noodles and determination. But every small paycheck brought her closer to her goal: a business degree and the independence she craved. Her professors at the community college noticed her immediately. While other students chatted and formed study groups, Maya sat alone, taking meticulous notes and asking sharp questions. She never missed a class, never turned in late assignments, and maintained perfect attendance even when she was running on 3 hours of sleep. Her business law professor once commented that Maya approached her education like a warrior, preparing for battle. The other students tried to include her in their social activities, but Maya politely declined their invitations. She had learned that depending on others led to disappointment, and she couldn't afford to be distracted from her goals. Instead, she spent her free time in the library, reading about successful business owners who had started with nothing and built empires through sheer determination. Maya's vision began forming during her second year of college. She had seen, too, many young people like herself struggle after leaving the children's home system. They needed more than just temporary housing and basic life skills training. They needed a place where they could develop real job skills, find mentorship, and build the confidence necessary to succeed in the world. After graduating with honors and a heavy load of student debt, Maya worked for 2 more years, saving every penny she could while developing her business plan. Studied community needs assessments and visited similar programs in other cities. Her plan was thorough, realistic, and born from personal experience that gave her insights no textbook could provide. Finding the right location took months of searching. Maya needed somewhere affordable but accessible in a neighborhood that actually needed her services. She finally found an old community center building that had been abandoned for years. The roof leaked, the walls needed paint, and the electrical system required updates. But it had good bones, and the price was right. The day Maya signed the lease, she stood alone in the empty building, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the space where she would build something meaningful. She had no staff, no clients, and barely enough money to cover the first month's expenses. But she had something more valuable, an unshakable belief in her vision and the determination to make it happen. Opening day arrived 6 months later. Maya had personally painted every wall, fixed what she could afford to fix, and furnished the space with secondhand furniture and donated equipment. She had designed programs for job training, tutoring, and life skills development. Most importantly, she had created a safe space where young people could come without judgment and leave with hope. That first day, only 3 teenagers showed up. They were suspicious, guarded, and clearly testing her to see if she was genuine or just another adult who would eventually let them down. Maya recognized that look because she had worn it herself for years. She didn't try to convince them with words. Instead, she showed them through actions that this place was different, that she was different, by the end of the first year. Maya's center was serving 40 regular clients and had a waiting list for some programs. Word spread through the community that this was a place where young people could get real help without being judged or patronized. Maya had built something extraordinary, but she had built it the only way she knew how, by trusting no one but herself and carrying every responsibility on her own shoulders. Maya's daily routine remained as demanding as ever. She arrived first every morning and left last every evening. She handled intake interviews, taught job skills classes, managed the budget, maintained the building, and provided individual counseling to young people facing crises. Her staff respected her dedication but worried about her refusal to delegate important tasks or take time off. The truth was that Maya didn't know how to share responsibility. Her childhood had taught her that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. This belief had been her strength, driving her to achieve things that seemed impossible. But it was also becoming her limitation, preventing her from building the kind of partnerships and support systems that could help her center grow and thrive. Late at night, after everyone else had gone home, Maya would walk through the quiet building, checking locks, and turning off lights. These moments of solitude were both peaceful and lonely. I had built something beautiful, something that mattered. But she had built it as a fortress with herself as the sole guardian. She didn't yet realize that her greatest challenge wouldn't be external threats or financial pressures, but learning to let others stand beside her in the battles ahead. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Maya found a notice taped to her front door. The city had approved a massive development project just 3 blocks away. Luxury apartments, upscale restaurants, and boutique shops would transform the neighborhood that had been home to working families for generations. Maya crumpled the paper in her fist, already understanding what this meant for her community. Within weeks, the changes began. Property values started climbing, so fast that longtime residents couldn't keep up. The Martinez family, who had lived next door to the center for 15 years, received an eviction notice because their landlord wanted to renovate and triple the rent. Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner grocery store where Maya's kids bought snacks after school, was forced to close when her lease wasn't renewed. Maya watched families pack their belongings into moving trucks, taking their children away from the only neighborhood they had ever known. These weren't just statistics in a newspaper article. These were the parents who volunteered at her center, the grandmothers who brought homemade cookies to events, and the teenagers who had found their first jobs through her programs. The center itself wasn't immune to the changes. Rent doubled overnight when the building's owner decided to capitalize on the rising property values. The utilities costs increased as the city upgraded infrastructure to attract wealthier residents. Even basic supplies became more expensive as local businesses were replaced by trendy shops that catered to newcomers with higher incomes. Maya found herself fighting battles she had never expected. At city council meetings, she listened to developers paint rosy pictures of neighborhood improvement while completely ignoring the displacement of existing residents. She spoke during public comment periods, explaining how gentrification was destroying the very community these improvements claimed to help. Her words fell on deaf ears. The financial pressure became overwhelming. Maya had always run the center on a tight budget, but now she faced impossible choices. Should she cut the after-school tutoring program or the job training classes? Should she reduce staff hours or eliminate the free meal program that fed hungry teenagers every afternoon? Every decision felt like betraying the young people who depended on her sleep became a luxury Maya couldn't afford. She spent nights writing grant applications, searching for new funding sources, and trying to stretch every dollar further than seemed possible. Her small apartment became cluttered with paperwork, unpaid bills, and rejection letters from foundations that had supported other causes instead. The stress began showing in ways Maya couldn't hide. Her hands shook when she drank her morning. Coffee and dark circles appeared under her eyes, no matter how much concealer she applied. During staff meetings, she snapped at volunteers over minor issues, then felt terrible about her sharp words. The young people at the center started asking if she was okay, but Maya always insisted everything was fine. One evening, Maya discovered that someone had broken into the center's storage room and stolen several computers that were used for job training classes. Insurance would barely cover replacement costs, and she couldn't afford the increased premiums. Standing in the ransacked room, surrounded by scattered papers and broken equipment, Maya felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her shoulders. The breaking point came during a community meeting about the proposed closure of the local bus route. City officials argued that the new residents would drive cars and wouldn't need public transportation. Maya stood up, her voice shaking with exhaustion and frustration, explaining that many of her clients depended on that bus to get to work and school. A well-dressed woman in the audience suggested that maybe it was time for people to adapt or relocate. That night, Maya sat in her car outside the center, too tired to drive home. I had poured everything into this place, and it still wasn't enough. The problems kept multiplying faster than she could solve them. For the first time since opening the center, Maya wondered if she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The next morning brought another crisis. The health department had received complaints about the center's kitchen, which Maya used to serve free meals. The inspection revealed minor violations that would have been overlooked in the past, but now required expensive fixes that would drain her emergency fund. Maya realized that even city services were becoming hostile to places that served low-income residents. Maya's isolation deepened as the pressure mounted. Friends from college had moved on to stable careers and comfortable lives, and she had little time for social relationships anyway. Her staff members were dedicated but young and inexperienced. Looking to her for answers she didn't have. The community members she served were dealing with their own crises, as rent increases and job losses affected nearly everyone in the neighborhood. Despite the mounting challenges, Maya refused to show weakness. She arrived early every morning, with a smile greeted each young person by name, and maintained the programs that had become lifelines for dozens of families. Inside, she felt like she was drowning. But she had learned long ago that showing vulnerability meant giving up control. The center's success stories became Maya's only source of hope during those dark months. When Jennifer landed her first full-time job after completing the computer skills program, Maya felt a moment of pure joy. When David graduated high school despite aging out of foster care the year before, Maya knew that every sleepless night had been worthwhile. These victories reminded her why she kept fighting, even when the odds seemed impossible. But the victories couldn't erase the growing fear that gnawed at Maya's confidence. What if all her hard work wasn't enough? What if the forces of gentrification were too powerful for one person to resist? What if she failed all the young people who counted on her? These questions haunted her during long, lonely nights when she tried to find solutions that seemed increasingly out of reach. Maya had always believed that determination and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Now, facing challenges that were bigger than any individual could handle alone, she began to understand that some battles require more than a single warrior, no matter how fierce or dedicated that warrior might be. The letter arrived on a Friday morning, stamped with the city seal and marked urgent. Maya's hands trembled as she read the official notice. The city council had voted to rezone her entire block for commercial development. The community center had 6 months to relocate or shut down permanently. There was no appeal process, no compromise offered, and no consideration for the lives that would be disrupted. Maya stared at the letter until the words blurred together. 6 months. After everything she had built, everything she had sacrificed, the city was giving her 6 months to find a miracle. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, then walked to the main room where 30 teenagers were working on their homework. They looked up at her with trusting faces, unaware that their safe haven was about to disappear. The first person to abandon ship was Tony, her assistant director. He had been with Maya for 3 years, but when she told the staff about the rezoning, he quietly submitted his resignation the next week, found a stable job at a larger nonprofit across town, one with reliable funding and a secure building. Maya couldn't blame him, but his departure left a hole in her team that she couldn't afford to fill. Within a month, 3 more staff members had given their notice. They needed steady paychecks and couldn't wait to see if Maya could perform another miracle. Each resignation felt like a personal betrayal, even though Maya understood their practical reasons for leaving. She had always prided herself on creating a workplace where people wanted to stay. But now she watched her team dissolve around her. Maya began working 18-hour days, trying to do the jobs of 4 people while simultaneously searching for a new location and fighting the rezoning decision. She attended every city council meeting, wrote letters to local newspapers, and organized petition drives. The responses were always polite but firm. Progress couldn't be stopped, they said. The neighborhood needed to evolve with the times. The physical toll became impossible to ignore. Maya lost 15 pounds in 2 months, surviving on vending machine, snacks and coffee because she never had time for proper meals. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed hollow cheeks and exhausted eyes that she tried to hide with makeup. When the teenagers asked why she looked so tired, she always had a cheerful excuse ready. Sleep became a distant memory. Maya lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling and running through impossible scenarios in her mind. Could she find a building? Owner willing to rent to a nonprofit at below market rates? Could she raise enough money to buy a property outright? Could she move the entire operation to another neighborhood without losing the community connections that made her programs effective? The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening during a community meeting. Maya was explaining the situation to parents and volunteers when she suddenly felt dizzy. The room started spinning, and she gripped the podium to keep from falling. Someone called out asking if she was okay, but Maya insisted she was fine, just a little tired. She finished the meeting from her chair, trying to maintain her composure while her body screamed for rest. That night, Maya collapsed in her apartment hallway. While climbing the stairs to her door, her neighbor found her an hour later and wanted to call an ambulance, but Maya refused medical attention. She couldn't afford hospital bills, and she certainly couldn't afford to be seen as weak when so many people were counting on her strength. Financial situation became desperate. Maya hadn't paid herself a salary in 3 months, using every available dollar to keep the center running. Her personal credit cards were maxed out from buying supplies and covering utility bills. The electricity was about to be shut off. She had already received 2 eviction notices for her apartment. During the 4th month of the countdown, Maya received the cruelest blow yet. A developer offered to buy the building that housed her, sent her for triple what the current owner had paid just 2 years earlier. The owner, who had always seemed supportive of Maya's mission, accepted the offer immediately. Maya learned about the sale from a newspaper article, not from any personal conversation. Maya's isolation became complete. Her remaining staff members were too young and inexperienced to offer real support, and she couldn't burden them with problems she was supposed to solve. The community members who used her services were dealing with their own displacement crises. Former colleagues had moved on 2 other jobs in other cities. Maya realized she had no one to call, no shoulder to lean on, no partner to share the impossible weight she carried. The final month arrived like a death sentence. Maya spent her days packing equipment and trying to help her clients find other resources, though she knew nothing else in the area could replace what they were losing. At night, she walked through empty rooms that had once buzzed with life and laughter, remembering conversations and celebrations that felt like they had happened in another lifetime. Maya's pride became her prison. She had always been the strong, 1. The problem solver. The person who never gave up. Admitting defeat felt like betraying everyone who had believed in her. But as she sat in her office on the last week before closing, surrounded by boxes and legal notices, Maya finally understood what it meant to fight until the very last moment with nothing left to give. The warrior who had never bent was finally breaking, though she still refused to let anyone see the cracks in her armor. She had 6 more days to find a miracle, and she still believed she had to find it alone. The night before the final city council hearing, Maya sat alone in her office, surrounded by cardboard boxes and memories. Tomorrow would be her last chance to speak before the people who held the power to save or destroy everything she had built. She had prepared a speech that laid out every reason why the community center mattered, but deep in her heart, she knew it wouldn't change anything. The silence in the building felt different now. For 5 years, these walls had echoed with laughter, heated discussions, and the sound of young people discovering their potential. Tonight, the emptiness seemed to swallow every small noise Maya made as she moved through rooms that would soon belong to someone else. Maya's phone had been disconnected 3 days earlier. She couldn't afford the bill, and there seemed little point in maintaining service when she had no one to call anyway. The isolation was complete now. She existed in a bubble of quiet desperation, cut off from the world that continued spinning around her. Her car had been repossessed the week before, towed away while she was inside trying to finish the programs for her remaining clients. Maya watched from the window as the tow truck disappeared around the corner, taking with it her last connection to mobility and independence. Now she walked everywhere or took the bus when she could afford the fare. Food had become optional. Maya couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. Her stomach had stopped growling days ago, replaced by a constant hollow ache that she had learned to ignore. The vending machine in the lobby still contained some crackers she had bought with loose change found in her desk drawers. But even those seemed like luxuries she couldn't justify. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the disconnected phone or even the looming closure. The worst part was the look in the eyes of the young people who still came to the center each day. They knew something was wrong, even though Maya tried to maintain her usual cheerful facade. They whispered among themselves, asking questions she couldn't answer honestly. 17-year-old. Alex had asked her directly that afternoon if the center was really closing. Maya looked into his worried face and saw herself at that age, abandoned and afraid, but trying to be brave. She wanted to lie, to give him false hope that might ease his fear. But she couldn't bring herself to make promises she couldn't keep. Instead, she just hugged him and said they would figure something out. But Maya knew there was nothing left to figure out. She had exhausted every possibility, called in every favor, and explored every option. The arithmetic was simple and brutal. She needed $50,000 to relocate and another $30,000 to operate for 6 months while rebuilding their client base. She had $12 in her checking account and no credit left to borrow against. That evening, Maya did something she hadn't done in years. She cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears she had shed in private moments of frustration, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had kept locked away since childhood. She cried for the young people who would lose their safe space, for the community that was being scattered to the winds, and for herself as the protector who had ultimately failed to protect anything. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. As she sat in the darkness of her office, she had spent so many years building walls around her heart that she had also built walls around her entire life. In her determination to never depend on anyone, she had ensured that no one could depend on her when she needed help most. Maya thought about her college friends, who had tried to stay in touch before eventually giving up on her polite but distant responses. She remembered community leaders who had offered to collaborate on projects only to be told that Maya preferred to handle things herself. She could recall dozens of moments when people had reached out with genuine offers of partnership or support, all of which she had gracefully declined. The irony was devastating. Maya had created a place where young people could find community and support, but she had never learned to accept either for herself. She had taught hundreds of teenagers that asking for help was a sign of strength while living her own life, as if needing others was weakness. Walking through the neighborhood that night, Kea saw what she had been too busy and too proud to notice before. In apartment windows, she watched families sharing late dinners, parents helping children with homework, couples talking through problems together. She saw groups of friends gathered on stoops, supporting each other through difficulties she could only imagine. For the first time, Maya understood what she had given up in her quest for independence. She had chosen strength over connection, control over collaboration, and pride over partnership. These choices had carried her through childhood trauma and early adulthood struggles. But they had also left her completely alone when she faced challenges too. It's big for any individual to handle. The community center had been her attempt to give others what she had never had, but in building it as a fortress of her own making, she had trapped herself inside. She was the warrior who had conquered every personal battle by fighting alone, only to discover that some wars required armies, not heroes. As dawn approached, Maya sat on the front steps of her building one last time, watching the sun rise over a neighborhood that would soon forget she had ever been there. Tomorrow she would speak to the city council, knowing her words would fall on deaf ears. Then she would lock the doors of her center forever, taking with her the bitter knowledge that her greatest strength had become her fatal flaw. The warrior. Woman had fought until the very last, just as she had always done. But for the first time, she wondered if fighting alone had been courage, or simply the only way she had ever known how to lose. The city council chamber felt colder than usual as Maya walked to the podium for what she knew would be her final speech. Only a handful of people sat in the audience, most of them developers and city officials who had already made up their minds. The hearing was just a formality, a legal requirement before the bulldozers could move in. Maya's hands shook as she unfolded her carefully written speech. I had poured her heart into these words, explaining how the community center had changed. Lives prevented kids from making dangerous choices, and given hope to families who had nowhere else to turn. She spoke about Alex, who had learned to code and landed his first job. She talked about Rosa, who had earned her GED after dropping out at 16. She mentioned dozens of success stories that meant everything to her and nothing to the people. Making decisions, the council members barely looked up from their phones as Maya spoke. One was reading emails, another was checking the time on his watch. The chairman interrupted her twice to remind her that she only had 3 minutes to make her case. Maya's voice grew stronger as she realized this might be her last chance too. Fight for something that mattered more than her own pride. When she finished speaking, the room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the scratch of pens on paper. Maya gathered her notes, preparing to walk out of her final battle. In defeat, the vote would be a formality, and by next month, her building would be demolished to make room for luxury condos that the people she served could never afford. As Maya stepped away from the podium, a man she had never seen before approached the microphone. He was tall, wore a simple dark suit, and carried a thick folder of documents. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Daniel Rodriguez introduced himself as a civil rights an attorney who had been documenting discriminatory practices in the city's rezoning process. He had spent months quietly building a case that Maya never knew existed. While she had been fighting alone, he had been fighting alongside her from the shadows. Gathering evidence and preparing legal arguments that could change everything, Daniel presented documents showing how the rezoning violated federal fair housing laws. He had maps demonstrating the racial and economic patterns of displacement. He had testimonies from community members who had been forced to leave their homes. Most importantly, he had evidence that the city had failed to follow proper procedures when approving the development project. Maya sat in stunned silence. As Daniel methodically destroyed every argument the city had made for the rezoning, he spoke about environmental impact studies that had been ignored, community input sessions that had been poorly advertised, and legal requirements that had been bypassed. His presentation was thorough, professional, devastating to the city's case. The council members were no longer checking their phones, were frantically whispering to their legal advisors and shuffling through papers at development companies. Lawyer requested a recess to review the new evidence. The chairman, who had seemed bored throughout Maya's speech, was now asking detailed questions about federal oversight and potential lawsuits. During the break, Daniel approached Maya in the hallway. She stared at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, unable to understand why a stranger would invest so much time and effort in saving her center. When she asked why he had helped her, his answer was simple and profound. "I've been watching. You carry this fight by yourself for months," he said. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." His words hit Maya like a physical blow, shattering something deep inside her chest. Not her strength, but the wall that had kept her strength isolated and disconnected from others who shared her values. The hearing resumed with a very different atmosphere. The council voted to postpone any decision for 6 months while the legal issues were reviewed. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something Maya had thought impossible just hours earlier. More importantly, it was time to rebuild and reorganize with help instead of struggling alone. As word spread about the postponement, something remarkable began to happen. People Maya barely knew started appearing at the center with offers of help. Mrs. Patterson, who owned the bakery 2 blocks away, brought boxes of DAH pastries for the kids. A group of college students volunteered to help with tutoring programs. Local business owners offered to donate supplies and equipment. Maya discovered that many people in the community had wanted to help her all along, but her reputation for handling everything herself had made them reluctant to offer. They had assumed she didn't need assistance because she never asked for it. Now that the crisis had forced her to be vulnerable, they felt comfortable stepping forward with support. Daniel didn't just disappear after winning the legal battle. He helped Maya restructure the center's operations, showing her how to delegate responsibilities and build partnerships with other organizations. He introduced her to a network of lawyers, activists, and community leaders who had been fighting similar battles across the city. For the first time in her adult life, Maya learned what it felt like to share responsibility instead of carrying it alone. When the next crisis came, which it inevitably did, she didn't face it in isolation. She had a team of people who believed in her mission and were willing to fight for it. Alongside her, the community center not only survived, but began to thrive in ways Maya had never imagined possible. With more people involved, they could offer new programs, serve more families, and advocate more effectively for policy changes. Maya remained the leader, but she was no longer the only person making decisions or solving problems. 6 months later, the city council unanimously voted to protect the center's building from future development. The victory belonged not to Maya alone, but to an entire community that had learned to work together. Maya had discovered that accepting help didn't make her weak or dependent. Instead, it had multiplied her impact and strengthened her ability to serve others. Standing in the center's main room during their victory celebration, surrounded by young people, volunteers, and new allies, Maya finally understood the difference between being rescued and being supported. Daniel hadn't saved her. Instead, he had shown her that true warriors inspire others to join the fight, creating movements that are stronger than any individual effort. The warrior woman had learned that her greatest battle wasn't against external enemies, but against the isolation that had once protected her and ultimately limited her. Now she fought not alone, but as part of something larger than herself.